Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are very excited to have some amazing speakers, leading experts in the field joining us today. I think we'll give it just a few seconds and let everyone join. Rocío, if you want to give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Thank you. Super, thank you. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to cover today's webinar in about 45 minutes to an hour. We will explore all you need to know about registering medical devices and IVDs with China's NMPA, which is the National Medical Products Administration. We'll also explore cultural aspects to take into consideration when entering the biggest country in Asia with the second highest GDP in the world. We will then wrap up by offering approaches to translation workflows which ensure our clients enter China without any issues. So we have some really great speakers today, and I'll get straight into the introductions. First up, we have Hamish King. Hamish is a lawyer by training, and his expertise is supporting companies with difficult regulatory affairs queries in China. Hamish is admitted as a lawyer in Hong Kong and New South Wales in Australia, and was formerly with UK Magic Circle firm Linguistic in Hong Kong. He regularly writes articles on China, market access, and regulatory pathways. Currently residing in Hong Kong and specializing in NMPA registration of medical devices, Hamish has a close interest in the regulatory implications of digital healthcare and AI applications. Next up, we'll have Victoria Caldy. From major multinationals to small startups, Victoria has over 20 years experience providing life science clients with planning and strategy for product launches, regulatory approvals, and registrations, including building a Class 3 medical device company from the bottom up, which provides her with hands-on experience in solving the challenges of getting to market. Then we'll have Shirley Yeng, which is Seprotec's language consultant in China. Shirley Yeng is a localization executive with over 28 years of experience, has a background in translation and as localization consultation, and has spearheaded global operations set up and developed in Europe and Asia, and particularly in China, Vietnam, and now also Japan. Today, she works daily with her teams of language experts based in different cities, whereby together they provide the best fit translation and localization solutions to clients from all over the world. Finally, we have Rocío Fernández. Rocío is passionate about languages since childhood. Rocío's training has always been oriented towards multilingualism. After 7 years as a linguistic project manager and team lead since 2019, she is a head of quality at Seprotec, where she has also implemented ISO 1345 certification to the company's production workflow. Rocío is a philologist specialized in Italian. She also holds a degree in translation and interpreting, a master's degree in foreign trade and international relations, and an international MBA at the European Institute of Higher Learning in Barcelona. She's currently studying a degree in law at the UNED. And I'm Garth Hedenskog, and I'm head of corporate sales at Seprotec. So today we have attendees from all corners of the world, as well as our speakers. Rocío is based in Madrid, as I am. Victoria is based in Malaga, in the south of Spain. Hamish is in Hong Kong, and Shirley is in Singapore. Just the usual housekeeping notes to consider. Everyone's mics on mute. But you will be able to interact within the chat, so please feel free to post any questions, and we'll save them until the end, until our Q&A session. So you have a really unique opportunity today to ask any questions you have about today's topic to our experts. So please save your questions and get them to us before the end of today's webinar. So with that, I will hand over to our first speakers, which is Hamish King and Victoria Caldy.
Okay, thank you, Garth, for the introductions, and to all of you for joining us today to take a look at taking medical devices to market in China. Okay, so what are we going to cover in the first part of the session today? We'll take a look at, Garth, could you, that's it. We'll take a look at recent registration trends, regulatory framework, the standard pathways to register, that's class 1 filings and class 2 and 3 registrations, the device risk classification and whether a clinical trial is necessary. We'll also cover the alternative pathways to register and touch on the NMPA legal agent requirement. Okay, so first of all, let's set the scene of registrations in China to give you an idea of the market size and trends. And this information comes from a recent report published by the NMPA on registrations last year. What you can see on the slide is that registrations stalled in 2017 and 2018, and this was due to various changes in test requirements. But you can see that the application and approval numbers have soared, basically doubling from 2018 to 2021, from 6,000 to over 12,000. In 2021, you can see that around 11,000 medical devices, including IVDs, were approved in China, out of a total of 12,000 applications. So this is roughly a 15% increase on 2020. And in total, there was over 1,700 new registrations, and roughly 1/3 of all approvals were for IVDs. But please note that these numbers don't include class 1 and class 2 domestic products, because those applications are submitted to their provincial or municipal NMPAs rather than the national one. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of product groups that were registered last year? They pretty much stayed the same, though there were changes in positions. For example, dental instruments moved from position 1 down to position 3. And in terms of country of origin of the medical device, both Italy and the United Kingdom have obtained more approvals last year, and they now join the top 10. So I'm going to hand over to Hamish to look at the regulatory framework. Okay.
Thanks, Victoria. So before we look more deeply at how to register medical devices in China, it's good to get an understanding of the regulatory framework. There are around 20 laws relevant for medical device administration and supervision. These are governed by the State Council primarily and issued by it. There are around 100 rules and regulations, which is the lower level of laws explaining enforcement and more detail around the State Council orders. These are issued by the regulator, the specific medical device regulator, the National Medical Products Administration, or NMPA. And then there's the detailed guidelines and standards, technical reviews, guidelines, etc., that are issued by various bodies, including the Standardization Administration Commission and Center for Medical Device Standardization Administration. Prior to the year 2000, there was in fact no specific medical device laws relating to registration or supervision, so companies could actually import products without registering, without restriction. It was only following the year 2000 that there was some initial restrictions introduced before, in 2014, Order 650, as it's known, brought about a radical change in the scrutiny and the supervision of medical devices and IVDs in China. In 2017, there was a revision to this regulation called Order 680, and we've had the most recent evolution in 2021, June last year, which the practical effects of which are still being felt as the regulatory framework fills out these subsidiary regulations and standards that tack on to the primary Order 739. The general trend and the general message, though, is that there is increasing harmonization along with the increasing scrutiny, but it still has its quirks and its subtleties, and we're going to go into a bit more about that today. Okay.
Okay, so what type of approvals are possible with the NMPA? We have Class 1 products, which require a filing only, and their certificate is valid indefinitely, whereas Class 2 and Class 3 products must undergo registration for certificates, and their certificates are valid for 5 years. The renewal application for the certificate must be submitted at least 6 months before the expiry date. But as the renewal process is very similar to an initial registration, we recommend our customers to allow at least 18 months in case local testing is required. There are other types of approvals as well, such as extensions or a product change. These can take roughly 9 to 18 months because type testing may be triggered, and we'll cover type testing a little later. A typical administrative change, such as the address of the applicant, takes about 6 weeks, whereas IFU changes may take around a month. Okay, but before you start an application for filing Class 1 or registering Class 2 and 3 medical devices in China, you first need to determine the classification of your product. So the classification in Europe can only serve as an indication, as there are often very different classifications in China, and products are generally ranked in a higher risk class in China than abroad. And here on the slide, you can see that an EU Class 1 may indeed be a Class 2 in China, and maybe an EU Class 2A, 2B may be indeed a Class 3 in China. But the question is, how do you classify a medical device? And Hamish will talk about that now.
So how do you classify a medical device? There's a fairly strict and rigorous process according to the regulations. First, you check the extensive classification catalogue. It vividly provides many examples. Unfortunately, it's only in Chinese at this stage. If the product does not appear in the catalogue, then you should judge risk classification according to the rules for medical device classification. If it's still unclear, then you can make an official application to the NMPA, and we see this in around 5 to 10% of cases for our customers. And there are updates, I should say, particularly to the classification catalogue every year or so. And there are a few recent updates in the last 3 years. And in 2020, in fact, there were, for example, 225 different types of products which were removed from the classification catalogue completely. So they're no longer considered to be medical devices in China. For example, sleep monitors or electric toothbrushes or birth bathtubs. So this is the kind of changes that happen each year. In 2021, there's further adjustments relating to Class 1, the lowest risk medical devices. And this year, there's already been another update in March, where certain products were down classified from Class 2 to Class 1, for example, for non-sterile types of liquid and paste dressings. There was also some down classification for some neurological and cardiovascular surgical instruments, which will be of interest to those manufacturers. For example, extension tubes, catheter sterilization connectors, or arterial puncture needles.
Okay, so when it comes to classifying medical device software, there is a distinction between standalone or software as a medical device, so SAMD, and embedded software or software in medical devices, SIMD for short. And these distinctions follow global harmonization guidance. The key difference is really whether physical hardware is required to complete the intended use, and whether a common computing platform is sufficient for the operation of the software, as you can see on the slide. And then there are certain rules that you need to follow in terms of cybersecurity, which Hamish will look at now.
Yes, so any Class 2 or 3 device with a network connection, electronic data interchange, or remote control needs to consider at least the software and cybersecurity requirements. So this is legislated by a particular technical guideline, which was most recently updated again in March of this year, all part of the regulatory update happening with the Order 739, which we talked about earlier. In particular, it's worthwhile pointing out that that products with software with the following functions: electronic data interchange, remote access control, or user access control, need to ensure that the data is rigorously follows the cybersecurity guideline. There's three broad aspects along which it's reviewed, privacy, integrity, and availability, and that's done throughout the product lifecycle. And you'll need to submit a cybersecurity description document as part of your submission dossier. Okay.
Thanks, Hamish. So, what is the regulatory pathway if your product is a risk class 1? Well, class 1 products don't require local testing, and it's a document-based process only. So this involves the first stage involving the preparation of the registration documents. Then we write the product technical requirements, which is appended to the certificate when it's issued. And then we move on to the notarization of documents, and then finally the submission. In our experience, the total timeline for a class 1 product filing is between 2 and 4 months. The documents must be submitted in person to the NMPA counter. This is typically done by your NMPA legal agent in China. And if the documents are complete and they meet the formal requirements, then a certificate for the filing with an NMPA stamp will be issued on the spot. And for our customers, one of our experts will walk to the registration, to the counter with the registration document for submission and return with the certificate on the same day. And now Hamish will look at class 2 and class 3 registrations.
As you'll immediately see from the slide, it's a much more complicated and lengthy process. And we're going to walk through a few key steps here. First of all is the fairly basic collection of the relevant documentation, according to relevant templates, which we will provide to our customers. For example, there's the product technical requirement step, which Victoria already talked about in the context of class 1. In the context of class 2 and 3 risk medical devices, it's an even more important document because it sets up the parameters along which the type testing, the local tests in China, which is quite a specific China requirement, will be conducted. And that's the second highlighted point on the slide here with the yellow markings. That's the type tests. So that generally takes 3 to 6 months. It must be done in an NMPA certified test lab in China. We work with a number of labs every day, and we have test lab engineers in there because this process is very important to get right first time. Otherwise, there can be a lot of back and forwards and difficulty with sample shipment, import, customs clearance, of course, the testing itself. The third point I'd like to highlight here is the clinical evaluation report. This has a similar name to what you may be familiar with in Europe, CER, but it is a different document. You can't simply translate your document to Chinese and then submit it to the regulator. It really must be adjusted to the specific China requirements and relevant standards and guidelines for your products. So that's very important. And this clinical evaluation report, of course, depends on you being able to avoid a clinical trial, which is another point we're going to talk about. It details the ways in which your product is safe and effective, either on the basis of a overseas clinical data or a predicate device, and I won't go into that too much more here. Otherwise, the rest of the steps are relatively self-explanatory. There's a preparation of documentation stage. There's also a submission and waiting stage, as well as a response stage to the regulator once the submission's finally put in. It's called the supplementary notice stage, and you have 1 year within which to respond to the supplementary notice before the certificate is issued. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Hamish. So one of the key issues when registering your medical device is whether a clinical trial is required in order to register. The default position is that all class 2 and 3 products must undergo clinical trials in China in order to support their registration application. There is actually a catalogue of high-risk medical devices that used to need to register their products with the support of human clinical trial data, such as implantable cardiac pacemakers or tissue engineering medical products that have living cells. But since the implementation of the Order 739 last year, and also some recent clinical evaluation law updates, even high-risk medical devices can avoid clinical trials depending on the feasibility of clinical evaluation against the basic principles of safety and performance for that high-risk product. But in general, the decision process is as follows. The first step is to look at the clinical trial exemption catalogue, and this is updated every year or so. So if your product figures on this exemption list, then a simplified clinical evaluation is sufficient. The next step is to look at whether clinical trial data collected outside of China meets the NMPA requirements. And typically this will require a multi-site clinical trial, often with over 100 cases. So if your medical device or IVD is not on the exemption list and you don't have adequate clinical trial data from overseas, then you can still avoid a clinical trial by comparing the safety and efficacy of your device against a predicate that has already gained NMPA approval. But of course, if the predicate device is from a direct competitor, then gaining access to some of that information that's going to be crucial for your clinical evaluation report that Hamish mentioned earlier is going to be pretty difficult. So relying on a predicate could be a hurdle unless you are using the predicate of a previous generation model in China. However, there are some more recent additional pathways to avoiding clinical trials, and that's with real-world data. It is still in its trial version, but the real-world data guidelines permit applicants to draw on their real-world evidence that's been generated either in your home country or in other markets to reduce the clinical trial case numbers that are required in China. So this is all quite complicated. So how do you make sense of it all? So one service we offer to our customers is a feasibility study, which analyzes all the data for your product and produces a report and recommendation about the most appropriate clinical pathway for your product and whether indeed a clinical trial is required. And if so, we can help you with that as we are a clinical research organization for China. So now over to Hamish to look at the fees.
Thank you. Yes, of course, the first question everyone asks is how long does it take? You know, we looked at that for class 1, it's 4 to 6 months. For class 2, it's 18 months approximately. In class 3, it's 21. And how much does it cost? Here on this slide, we've set out what are the official submission fees for NMPA approval for imported devices. Class 1 products, in fact, have no filing fee. Class 2, the cost is a little over 210,000 RMB, which is around 28,000 euros. Class 3 cost is a little over 300,000 renminbi, or around 40,000 euros. Of course, this is not the only cost. This is just one cost among a number of others. In particular, local testing fees, which I talked about earlier. Local test fee costs can be quite substantial. Customs fees, transportation fees, document drafting and support fees can also all add up. In terms of ballpark figures, we usually talk about 5 to 10,000 or a bit more for class 1 devices, euros. And this is a full cost. This is a full cost ballpark figure. Class 2 usually talk in the order of 80 to 100,000 euros. Class 3 registrations are going to cost ballpark total cost around 100 to 150,000 euros. And this all assumes no clinical trial. If a clinical trial is required, it's going to cost substantially more and take longer. So, you know, it's always a tip when talking to your service provider, really you need to understand the full cost, not just the cost you're showing up front, like your document drafting fees. That's me. Thank you. Next slide. So here we're just talking about, of course, can we do it quicker? The answer to this question, which people also want to hear, can we do it quicker and cheaper? The answer is there are some possibilities, but they are slim and they're not easy to satisfy. There's, first of all, we're going to talk about the Hainan Boao-Lecheng Medical Tourism Pilot Zone. It's had a bit of a flurry of publicity recently. It's part of a government mandated push for medical tourism. There are some possibilities for importing products without any approvals to this particular small zone in Hainan. That's China's Hawaii. And then to use data to go more broadly to China. The second point, we don't have time to go into the technical details here. If you're interested in more, please get in touch. Second one I'd like to just mention briefly is Hong Kong into Greater Bay Area. I'm sitting in Hong Kong today. Hong Kong listing actually has no application cost and it's voluntary, but there is a recent change that allows Hong Kong listed products, if you do elect to list your medical device or IVD, to then also apply to sell into the Greater Bay Area, which is actually has a population of a bit over 70 million people. So that's that's larger than many European countries. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so who can carry out the registration or filing of your medical device? Well, this needs to be done by a legal entity in China, known as the NMPA legal agent. And they're responsible for the supervision of tests, the administrative procedures, and the post-market surveillance over the full life cycle of the product. But who should you appoint? As a foreign manufacturer, you have three choices. First of all, a distributor. So you can appoint a distributor. However, they will have access to highly confidential product information in the registration application. And what's more, the distributor will physically receive the original registration or filing certificate. So that means that you, as the manufacturer, can't import, re-register, or modify any registrations or filings without the support of the distributor. And not only that, they have to agree to add any additional distributors. So if you want to expand your geographical coverage, you may be limited by the distributor who may not agree. Obviously, you can set up your own subsidiary in China, but this obviously comes with substantial costs and the requirements to set up a fully functioning post-market surveillance system and employ qualified staff locally. And then there's a third option of engaging a professional consulting company. Obviously, choosing a service provider is a neutral solution because you as the manufacturer will own the original documents, so you're in control. This means you can import your products, change or renew your registrations independently of your trading partner in China. So this means you retain the freedom to change distributors or add as many as you wish. And we're actually often contacted by companies who find themselves in situations where their NMPA legal agent is no longer cooperative. And obviously this is a difficult situation to find yourself in. But please know that there is a way of changing legal agents once the product is registered. So obviously it's really important to choose wisely your NMPA legal agent from the start, as it can take up to 2 years to register a product. So who is Cisema? So a little note on ourselves. We're a regulatory affairs consultancy and a clinical research organization for China. And we cover pharmaceuticals as well as medical devices and IVDs, cosmetics, industrial, and consumer goods. Garth? Thanks. We were founded in 2002 in Munich and in Beijing by a former Siemens engineer. And we've grown over the last 20 years to include 12 offices worldwide and almost 100 employees, most of those on the ground in China. And if you'd like to stay up to date with the latest regulatory changes, we share those up on our website as well as on our social media channels on LinkedIn and Twitter. Okay, so specifically for medical devices and IVDs, we help from pre-registration through to post-registration. So this will involve looking at your regulatory pathway, undertaking a feasibility study if you need that, to avoid potentially a clinical trial, and also we can help you with your clinical trials in China. In terms of registration, we conduct the NMPA filing of Class 1 as well as NMPA registration of Class 2 and Class 3. We are an NMPA legal agent, and we can also offer additional support for labelling, certain other services, as well as the Hong Kong listing that Hamish mentioned earlier to get access to the Greater Bay Area. And in terms of post-registration, we cover obviously the post-market surveillance, advertisement supports, post-market clinical follow-ups and observational studies, overseas factory inspections if these are required, as well as support services for your GMP, QMS, and SOPs. So thank you. We'll hand over to Shirley.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria and Hamish. Very, very insightful. Thanks for sharing that. And I think we'll go straight over to Shirley.
Thank you, Gus. Thank you. Now we'll have a short session about what are some of the language implications in China market, okay? So we'll touch on 4 key areas with the different variants of Chinese languages in Chinese-speaking regions. What would be the right locale that we could use? And what are the do's and don'ts? And last but not least, what to translate, okay? So usually we will hear this question that says, hey, I would like to translate the material into Chinese. And usually the first reply is, which country market are you selling to? Are you promoting to? Well, that is because, as we know, there are a distribution of Chinese-speaking regions in Asia, and we are aware, or some of us may be aware, that in China, in Malaysia, and Singapore, we are using simplified Chinese language, while in Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, we are using traditional Chinese. So what is exactly the differences between simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese? So today we're going to explore just 2 key characteristics of the written form, okay? Firstly is about how it is being represented in terms of the character set itself. So for example, let's look at the terminology antibody. So if we were to translate antibody into simplified Chinese and then also as into traditional Chinese, the same English term, you may notice that the highlighted in yellow character T, which the whole term means Kang T, the second character is T. You can see that the second character is being represented with lesser stroke in simplified Chinese versus the traditional Chinese character set. So this is how sometimes we can tell the difference, but you also notice there are characters that are similar as well, like in the first character. So this is how the characteristic of the number of strokes. And okay. Next, we look at the way it is being translated as in the expressions of the Chinese phrases and terms used in simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese. So like, for example, for the term silicon elastoma, as you may observe, for simplified Chinese, there is these 3 Chinese characters, while in traditional Chinese is represented in 6 characters. And the terminology is in fact referring to the same English source. However, in terms of pronunciation, in terms of the character set, the characters being used are totally different. So this is how the different variants of Chinese languages are represented in the different regions. And we'll go to the next slide to see more. Yeah. So over here, thanks to ISO, it actually helps to differentiate all these different locales of the Chinese character set used in the different regions by having all these language codes. So like, for example, if we want to communicate with our translators, we'll say, hey, I would like to get this material translated into ZHCN, which specifically mean for mainland China. And if it's meant for Taiwan, for example, then it would be ZHTW. So this is one very accurate way of specifying exactly which is the region that you want to translate your materials to. So it's not just the language itself. We also look into the cultural aspect of elements that's being used in the country. So things like our measuring units in the different region, the date time representation, the currency at its decimal symbols, how it represents the numerical format, even the paper size for, say, your brochure. So like, for example, in US, it would likely be letter size, but in China, usually people would like to hold a A4 size pamphlet in their hand. So even colors could be a different meaning in different region and culture, as well as images, what really speaks to the heart of your target audience and so forth. Okay. So what are some of the do's and don'ts? I just highlight a few here. On the translation convention for China in particular, Chinese itself comes with very rich heritage of phrases, and therefore it has the capability to express the original meaning of the English sentence into a shorter expression, but with exactly the same original meaning and tonality. So this is something that the Chinese would be very happy to see if your marketing materials, your websites are being written in such a way that it uses the rich heritage of its phrases. And having said that, this would mean when we are translating for the marketing and branding materials, it's important not to use as a literal translation because it may impact the comprehension and also make the target text unnatural. So therefore, it is very important to find a localization partner such as Seprotec, where we have the local linguist that is located in China, and therefore the translation is always done by the native speaking linguist itself. However, having said that, there's some exception to it. For example, translation for patent. It's important that for patent, it should be as literal as possible. This is to make sure that we minimize the dispute being happen, with the document content being viewed by different parties. So it is important that it has to be translated literally. So what this means is that when we are translating any content for China market, we must always remember who are the target audience groups we are targeting at, so that we are able to choose the right effective communication style and translation style for them. Now, there is something that we really need to watch out, and that is the Chinese law regulations to protect the interests of the end users in China. In China, it is banned to use words like top number one or best to describe your product or your service. So this is something that we need to watch out for. And yeah, so, okay. And what are the things that not to do? Firstly is we also need to observe China's territorial sovereignty. Therefore, when we are listing certain regions, try not to list them on the same level of bullet point. But if you must, then the description and how you term it is extremely important. Therefore, it is so important that you have to find the just as I say, the linguist that is really on the ground in China that has been very experienced in translating for locally. So things like 中国台湾 and Taiwan in bracket 中国, all these are very sensitive and needed kind of localization for China itself. And therefore, this brings to the next two topics, which is the sensitive topic. So even right now, if we are translating the term COVID-19, make sure that you do not use the term Wuhan 肺炎, which means Wuhan pneumonia, because it ties onto a province in China, and that is really a very sensitive topic. So make sure that we use the other two terms which is listed here. So in general, the the rule of thumb is to avoid any sensitive or offensive topics to do with the local politics at all costs. Okay. So this would be my last slide for today. There is some mandatory materials. Of course, it's not limited to, but just list out some of the important ones here is making sure that all your product information on packaging, on labeling, on your instruction for use specifications, they are all properly translated. This is by the regulatory requirements. And as well as your marketing and company information, such as your sales material, your patent application, your medical device intended use, your clinical data tested, basic information of your company is extremely important to be localized. Any technical document, as well as even your device software, whether it is embedded software or the standalone software itself, the user interface and the online sensitive help should be in Chinese. Of course, not forgetting that during the registration phase, as what our colleague in Cisema has pointed out, it should all be in Chinese as well. So that's my sharing for
Perfect, Shirley.
us.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of the points you mentioned today were very, very fascinating, and a lot of things that we didn't really know. So thanks for sharing that. I think we'll go straight into, we're doing great with time. So we'll go over to Rocío now, and where Rocío will cover quality at Seprotec. All yours, Rocío.
Thank you, Garth. So I will speak a little bit about quality in Seprotec, which is very important for making sure that your product will enter correctly in China. Okay. So as you might know, Seprotec is certified under different ISO norms. The first one we have is ISO 9001, which is the General Quality Management ISO. Then Seprotec got certified under ISO 17100, which is the specific ISO translation service management. And 1 year ago, Seprotec acquired ISO 13485, which is a specific ISO related to medical devices quality management. Okay. So the regular production workflow at Seprotec to make sure that we achieve the highest quality is this one you see in my slide. First step is that we receive the client request and we proceed to analyze the source text. And depending on that analysis, we proceed to the project classification based on the language we have to work with, the specialization of the text, the target audience, and also, of course, the client preferences. Once the project has been classified, we proceed to the assignment of the translation. We select the appropriate translator and revisor based on language combination, specialization, target public, client preferences, as we are doing with our partner Shirley here. Then once the translation and revision are finished, we proceed to perform a final check of the file and the delivery to the client. Okay. So our translations are always assigned to a native speaker in the target language, as Shirley and her team. And also they are, of course, specialists in the subject field they are treating. Then when the translation has been finished, as I told you before, we start on another step, that is the revision step. We perform a linguistic check of the source text of the target text, checking it against the source. This is, of course, assigned also to a native speaker in the target language, which is also a specialist in the subject field. Ideally, the revisor will have a higher profile than the one that the translator has. Then once those two steps are finished, we proceed to the final QA, which is a final verification of the file after translation plus revision, in order to make sure that the text is complete, the format is correct, and everything is okay to be delivered to the client. Sometimes when we are working on specific files, such as not editable files, PDF files, Illustrator, InDesign file, etc., we need to perform additional steps such as pre-DTP, which is the preparation of short text for translation, and also the post-DTP, that is the layout of the target text before to the delivery to the client. Those two steps are, of course, always assigned to providers who are familiar with the alphabet they are working with, in this case in Chinese, in order to make sure that we deliver the highest quality to our clients. Okay. One of the most important steps in our quality workflow is the linguistic management workflow. This is to select our translator, such as Shirley, our partner Shirley. The first step is that we perform together with the vendor management department a provider preselection based on the profile the provider has, the experience, the education, the CV, etc. Once we receive this information, we proceed to perform a primary evaluation, and we decide if the provider is suitable for our assignments. Then when the provider has reached our database, he or she starts on a briefing and training period. The provider performs a training based on the Seprotec guidelines and also specific client guidelines. And automatically he or she will enter a probation period of 10 projects that have to be 100% revised by an independent and active provider to make sure that the quality is up to standard. And then once these 10 first projects have been passed, this new provider or translator revisor gets the vendor status as approved or active. Okay. So our criteria for provider selection respect ISO 17100. Of course, all our translators must have a recognized degree in translation from an institution or higher education, or a recognized degree in other fields, plus 2 years of full-time professional experience in translation, or 5 years of full-time professional experience in translation. Additionally, Seprotec has its own policy. All our translators need to be native speakers of the target language. They must have a degree in translation and interpreting or philology, or a technical degree or equivalent qualification in another field, plus 2 or 5 years of documented professional experience in translation. Additionally, they need to provide us with detailed references of customers or reference letters. Okay, and that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Rocío. Well, I think everybody will be very pleased to know that we are on time and we are not going to be late today. We do have some questions, so I'd like to share them now. If anyone has, we have quite a few in the audience today. If you have questions, we have a few minutes. We won't go over the allotted time, but we'll see how many questions we can answer before that time. So thank you very much to today's speakers. I'm sure everybody found it very insightful. Let's go through some of the questions that's popped up earlier. So the first question we have was, we heard from you regarding the characteristics of written form in Chinese. The question is, I hear of Chinese like Cantonese. Is this a variant of Chinese language too? Shirley, that's maybe something for you.
Okay. Well, Cantonese, well, in fact, I myself, I'm also of a Cantonese speaking descendants. My grandfather is from Guangzhou. So yeah, so Cantonese itself, in fact, it is both a dialect and a language. It depends on which region use it. So like, for example, in Guangzhou, China, it would be as of a dialect spoken and used in the province. However, in Hong Kong, even during the business meetings among colleagues in Hong Kong, they usually would speak Cantonese, and because that's their mother tongue. And in fact, for the TV dramas, even, you know, they may be the channel of Cantonese, and you will see subtitling in Cantonese itself. So Cantonese uses traditional Chinese written form. However, it also has its own localized version of certain terminology that is only applicable in Hong Kong. So that's how it makes translation an art, because it really is very customized towards the different regions itself. So I hope that that helps to clear up.
I think that was a good answer.
Some of the things.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Shirley. We have a question that is, let me read that. Do you have any particular treatment of client feedback? Oh, that's a good one. Rocío, I think that's something we've heard before. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that question. Do we have any particular treatment of feedback we receive from clients?
Yeah, we are following the ISO 9001 and ISO 17100 when it comes to client feedback. We analyze each complaint or every feedback we receive by the clients. We register it in our system. We apply the corrective and preventive measures. And then every month and every quarter, we proceed to do an analysis, an analysis of all the complaints we have received in the past. And we establish the appropriate measures at global level to solve them.
Okay, thank you, Rocío. Yeah, we've got a few questions. So the next one that's saved is, I do know that there are some characters in both simplified and traditional Chinese. I think this is going to be again for you, Shirley. Is there a tool that could just do the conversion between these two character sets if I have material that are already in one of these languages?
Yes, there is some simple you know, tools that you can even find on the web. However, it's really a caution for anyone who's thinking of just straight adaptation of the Chinese conversion, because the number of characters being used daily for communication in Taiwan, for example, versus in China are different. And therefore, the traditional Chinese character sets has many more characters than the simplified Chinese character set. So you can imagine if there is a conversion tool, it might not be a one-to-one match mapping. So even if you can map the same characters, not forgetting that the same source term in English can be translated into different Chinese terms in both different regions. So the same Chinese term may not mean the same thing in both regions. So this means that after the conversion, you need to have a lot of post-editing and proofreading and translating. So the cost that comes out from it could be similar or even higher. And also it may not be as authentic as translation from the source language to the regional language. So it really depends on how the clients are using the materials. I would say that if you are using it for your high value clients, and if it is a matter of life and death, we are talking about medical device, let's say intended use and clinical data trials, then I would highly recommend that we should do authentic translation of the materials. Yeah.
Great.
That's
thank
my
you, Shirley.
advice.
I think we got a question for Victoria and Hamish. We haven't forgotten about you guys. So here's a question for you. I think it is, what should you think about when selecting your NMPA legal agent?
Thank you, Garth. Yeah, I can jump in and take that one. And also, I saw there's a really interesting question here about software as well, which I'd like to get to. The NMPA legal agent, I mean, Victoria talked about the 3 specific categories that you can have. It's very important because it does set you up really and lock you into one role for your entire time importing the product, with some provisos, and there is a little bit of flexibility later. But you can get into troubles, and we see that all the time with our customers who have selected the wrong, or a partner that was working for a while and then later didn't quite work out. So yeah, key points are we recommend separating the sales from the regulatory aspect, which means really setting up your own entity in China or using an independent third party like Cisema, we act. We don't do anything except for regulatory affairs, so we don't have any interest in the sales later on, and no conflicts there.
Thanks, Hamish. And the second question that popped up.
Yeah, yes, I see there's a very interesting question here about from Srijith about SAMD. What kind of type testing is applicable? Look, this is a really good question because, as you can imagine, software itself goes through a rigorous testing process in order to be released, and so on and so on. It's kind of obvious, or maybe perhaps more straightforward when there's a physical device, because that has clear parameters that the test labs are familiar with and used to, whereas software are innovative products almost by their nature. That's not just disparage the physical devices, of course, but they tend to be more innovative and newer for the specific test labs. So it can cause real difficulties for the test labs when they get to the local testing requirements. It all depends on your PTR drafting. We talked about this document, the product technical requirements. It sets out your parameters upon which the testing is done. And the PTR goes through phases throughout the registration process. The first draft of which is your own draft before it is discussed with the test lab itself to ensure that the testing can be completed appropriately along the parameters required. And so that is what is key, in particular for a software product. We've had an SAMD customer recently, and it's really just goes to that PTR drafting stage. It becomes much more important. The attendee may also be interested in that NMPA itself has published recent guidance and some online presentations and online learning, which we'd be happy to share with them as well.
Thanks, Hamish. I hope that Sarita, I hope that answered your question. We are doing fantastic for time today, which is wonderful. There was one more question that I saw in the chat, and that was from Beatriz, which was, the question was, do these documents for registration need to be filed in Chinese, or can it be left in English? Any Shirley, would that be for you?
I think that would be for Victoria for registration.
For Victoria, yeah, so for the registration, of course.
All the registration documents must be filed in Chinese.
There you go. Great answer. Fantastic. I don't think there's any questions now, but I'm sure if any questions have.
There is a question also from Beatrice. She asked about, does Chinese use Romanized? Is that Romanized Chinese? No, that would be we call it Hanyu Pinyin, which is the phonetics, the sound of the Chinese characters. I won't say that is used for language input, like using the keyboard, how you input the Chinese, but that will not be used in Chinese text per se. But when we are arranging user manual, for example, you have the glossary. In English, it will be called alphabetical order, right? But when it is in Chinese user manual, the glossary, the indexing will be arranged using their phonetic arrangement, which is Hanyu Pinyin. And just before Gus, we wrap up, I think there's one more question about, can we use the term number one?
Yeah, that's what you spoke about. We found that one very interesting. Yeah.
When giving statistic or proof, it depends on how powerful is your statistic and proof to show that you're truly number one in what kind of area. I think it's very important to specify exactly which is the boundary, which is the area that you are number one, so that we can quantify that, and then you'll be safe. Yeah. So that's my answer for that.
Very good answer. I think thanks for spotting that, Shirley. I think it's quite impressive. We are on the number. It is just about the time. So just before we do wrap up, if there are any questions, please get in contact with the team. There are the contact details on the screen right now. So again, I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers, and especially also to our marketing team, Alejandra and Solange, for helping put in the presentation together and helping with all the organization. Some of you might also notice our new logo. So that's been done this week. So thanks again to the marketing team for that. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in contact with us. It's been a pleasure being with you today, and we'll see you the next time. Thanks, everybody.